So I was just talking about in terms of peer struggles, in terms of that cruelty.
You're my proof. You put it on.
Okay. In terms of that cruelty, it's a lot more common in the online world because there's that anonymity and that ability to
Sliding me home.
say things that are, oh, we might, Joanne, do you want to? Yeah, great. I think you muted that. The ability to be a little bit more unkind. And then exclusion can happen in an obvious way, where we're obviously, students are obviously excluding each other, or it can be more subtle in the sense of just not inviting, one of their peers to be included, that type of thing. And then of course we have fighting, and sometimes that's physical, but a lot of the times that's verbal, but just, that conflict that happens with students. And then indifference. And this is a really important one because sometimes this can be the hardest thing for students to feel. So these are the students that just are not seen at all. The student in the classroom that people are not noticing and not noticing the challenges that they go through. And then another kind of hidden challenge is a lot of the times in peer dynamics, because we have, there's such a strong desire to fit in, such a strong desire to be included. There will be some students that pretend and show that things are okay when they're really not okay. So a student will get picked on, or how, someone will say something mean to them and they'll laugh it off, or they'll kind of put on a brave face, or they'll go along with it even. And this is also bystanding and bullying. So, one of their peers is picking on someone else, and there's this sort of, everything's fine, and they don't stand up against that, and they don't speak up to their friend. And that's really common. And so all of these things are just manifestations of a student that is struggling, feeling things they don't know how to deal with, and then they don't know what to do with those feelings. And so they come out in all of these ways. And at the heart of all of this is just a desire to feel okay, to feel safe, and most of all, to fit in. Because in kids developmentally, they're primed to fit in with their peers. So that's actually their survival that depends on that. So when you think about, in past history, young people have to fit in with their own age group because their parents are not going to be around forever. So there is this developmental desire that's really, really strong to be able to fit in that group. And so this is where a lot of this stuff is coming from. All of these types of challenges. So a really helpful way of understanding all of these challenges and the way they get expressed is through Cartman's drama triangle. So when we think of the different types of expressions and challenges in young people, usually kids will fall into one of these three categories. So either in a state of victimhood, so feeling like things are happening to them and they have no control and they're helpless, or a persecutor role. So the bully, the person that's taking it out on other people, whether that's subtle or obvious, or the rescuer, the one that's trying to fix everything and making everything okay, and often sacrificing themselves in the process, or at least burying their true emotions. So we're going to go through these three categories and explore them a little bit. So when we think about the child that is thinking in that victim mentality, so there is a lot of that sense, things are hopeless, there's nothing I can do. So these are the students that will come, to you as a teacher pretty regularly saying, so-and-so picked on me, or so-and-so did this. There's that feeling of, I can't help myself. And, this state of victimhood can extend to other things. We can feel victimized, or students can feel victimized by, work that's too hard. I can't do this. So a lot of that kind of language, I can't do this. This is too much. And so a lot of what we're seeing now after COVID is more and more students in this hopeless state, or this state of, I can't do it. I can't cope. And part of that is because they've been in this reality for the last couple of years where things have been totally out of their control.
I can't hear anything.
So, you can't hear anything? Sorry, I just heard someone say they can't hear anything. Can you hear Helen? Yeah, you can hear it. Yeah, okay, great. Beautiful. Fantastic. So because this this has been happening in this past couple of years, things have been out of their control. And so when we're experiencing situations and even beyond COVID, a lot of the things that happen in kids' lives are out of their control. So when we are experiencing that, what happens is that we start to feel more and more helpless, more and more unable to help ourselves. And so that's one of the reasons why so many kids now are in that headspace of I can't control my reality. So that's that headspace. The next one, the persecutor or the bully. This is that, trying to dump our feelings onto other people. So really getting angry at other people. And this again can be pretty subtle. This can be things that are just subtly excluding, or it can be outright cruelty. Or these are the students that also get angry at teachers, the acting out, just really externalizing all of their feelings. So if the victim really takes on the burden and lives the burden, the bully tries to dump the burden onto someone else. I don't want these feelings. I want to dump them somewhere else. And then the rescuer, this is that mentality of, I just want to bury those feelings. I don't want these feelings to exist. I need to fix this. So this comes out in a few different ways. On the one hand, these are the mediator kids. So these are the kids that, will spend their entire lunchtime trying to, fix things between their two friends who are fighting. So, and really getting caught up in it and feeling like they're really responsible and needing to take things on. This rescuer mentality also is that real silencing of our own needs. So if someone else is upset or angry, there's that impulse of, well, it must be, I need to make it better. So they'll often get into disempowering relationships with other kids because they're always trying to do the right thing. And this rescuer mentality, this desire to fix, it also can fall into addictive patterns. So if we're always trying to fix our feelings and get away from our feelings, this is where we can start to get into, being really drawn to being online because we're trying to get away from those feelings, or binge eating or things like that. Because the whole mentality is, how do I just make sure that we're in an even keel, and how do I bury everything? So this mentality is kind of the hidden one. So it's important for us to look at this, because often the child that's the rescuer, we will think when we see that child that, oh, this is great. This child is sorted. They're fine. They're not getting really upset or getting really angry. So we don't have to worry about that child. And so it's really important for us to understand that that child is just as much at risk as any other child. So we want to look at every single child, and no matter what we see on the surface, and understand that we're all going to have some patterns underneath. And so that's why it's a triangle, because we're all kind of connected on those points. We're responding to those points. So when a rescuer child sees a child that's in victim, they will naturally want to fix it. When a child that's in the bully mentality sees a child who's a victim, they will naturally want to push them further down. So it's this relationship that we're always in. And so when you think about peer dynamics, we always want to understand that it's a system. It's never one child that's a problem and everyone else is fine. It's always that there's this interaction that's happening. And the interaction is the part that we can do something about. So we really want to pay attention to that. Okay, so what do we do about this? So the first step in all this is to remember that it's not personal. So these reactions that students have, that are, whether they're getting angry or they're overwhelmed, we have to remember that it's not about us. It's not even really about the kids around them necessarily. It's a pattern that they have fallen into. So what we want to do is notice the pattern that they're into. It helps us kind of step back from it. So instead of thinking, Sally's doing this and I don't know how to help her, or, whatever it is that we kind of get caught in, we want to zoom out and go, okay, I see a pattern playing out here. I see that Sally's going into victim, and I understand that. And I also understand how I get hooked in that. And that's a really important piece of that, because just like kids, we are in relationship dynamic with them all the time. So we will naturally get pulled in a certain direction based on our own past experiences and our own preferences and our own triggers. So what's really important, probably the most important thing when we're thinking about helping students with peer dynamics, is to recognize how am I caught up in this pinball? Because this is the great part. We can't control what kids do with each other. We can try and we can try to intervene, but as we all know, just telling kids how to treat each other doesn't necessarily work. So we can't be there in every moment. We can't, there's so many situations as a psychologist where I would have students come to see me and say, I'm getting bullied, but the teacher can never sees it because it's always really subtle. And that happens all the time. You can't be in every single moment. And so the idea is, when we think about our own part, that's the one thing we can control. So if we start thinking about what role am I here? And if I make a little adjustment, how does that impact, like a pinball, every single one of my students? That's the beautiful thing. We can use ourselves as the agent of change, because what we're doing will naturally be a part of that system. So the best thing we can do is stop and think about, where do we get drawn into these patterns? This is a really powerful reflection piece. So I'll share a little bit of myself in terms of where I get drawn, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to do a little bit of a reflection where you think about your own patterns and maybe where that comes from in your family. So really just doing some reflection around this. So for me, victim is a really easy place for my mind to go. And that's partly because I had some really scary things happen when I was really little. And I was things that I couldn't control. And so I naturally was in this kind of helpless mode. And so when things are hard, or things change suddenly, usually my first thought is, I can't cope with this. This is too much. So I go into that kind of victim state. And then with rescuer, that comes usually right after victim. So I'll kind of get a little bit overwhelmed. I'll think things are too much. And then I'll immediately go into this, I have to make it better. I'll take on all the responsibility, and especially in a work situation. So I will, and this is where I go into these weird patterns where I stop. I don't take a break. I take on too much. Like I'm pretty bad at making in the moment decisions, because usually I'm a bit triggered when something comes up, and I'll just say yes to things, or I'll just like book things in without kind of really thinking it through, or thinking, oh, okay, well, that's extra, but maybe I need a little bit of time to come down from that, or I need some rest. So I go into this hyper mode of rescuer and really forget about my own well-being. That's an easy thing for me to do. And then persecutor, I mainly go into that in my close, intimate relationships. So that anger and frustration gets usually directed at the people, unfortunately, that are closest to me, which is something that a lot of us do. But also it sort of, I feel like as I get older, I almost get, it's unfortunate, but as I get braver in sort of like not quite being in victim quite so much, and standing in my power a bit more, I find that I'm a little bit easier to go into persecutor. So I get frustrated when I feel like people are not respecting me, or I feel like people are, not listening to me. It's a little bit easier for me to go into persecutor, where when I was younger, I would much more easily go into victim of, I don't know, and you must be right. So it's this interesting dance that we get into with all of these. And all of them are unhelpful in their own ways, but they all come from somewhere. So it's okay that we get into them. So we're going to go into later, how do we come out of those? But what I want you to do now is I want you to just take at least a minute or two. I'm going to give you a minute or two, and journal a little bit about these positions. So just put pen to paper, and really think about, where do I fall? And you can also think about your family. So in your family, where did your family fall? So I know for me, my dad was definitely in rescuer. He was sort of the people pleaser, keep the peace. And my mom kind of went back and forth between persecutor and victim, which is kind of then what I've learned to do. So you might want to think about that too. So I just want to give you a minute or two to reflect and really write some of these things down. Where do you fall in that triangle, in your own life, in your work, in your personal life? Let's give you a minute for that. I'm going to get my timer, 1 second.
Can I just ask if everyone can see both Dr. Watson and Helen? Got a yes?
Can Helen just back up a little bit? Because she's a little bit too close to the screen.
To her name. Okay. Thanks, Helen.
Great. Okay, so everyone had a bit of a chance to write some things down there.
Maybe her right.
Okay, so people are only seeing me.
Helen, can you move to your left a little bit? Yes, that way. Yeah. Yay. Better. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Someone's saying if Helen speaks, then you'll come back up. Like you'll bump back up in the, I don't know if Helen, you want to
So
say
that
something?
means they have picked speaker mode and not gallery.
Okay, there you go. Put it in gallery mode. Fantastic. And if I can also turn my camera off, if that will help, just let me know. Okay, fantastic. So the idea with that personal reflection of thinking about where we fall, it's so helpful because when you think about the peer dynamics of your students, you are always going to be in relation to that. So there will be certain students that trigger you more than other students. So for example, for me, because I go into victim so easily, that is the thing that triggers me the most in other people. So when I see someone just collapsing in a heap and thinking they can't cope and thinking it's all too much, that grates on me because I get irritated with myself when I do that. So the way I respond to myself in that state is the same way that my mind is going to respond to that student. So I'll either try to fix it for them. That's what I'll usually do. Or in my mind, I'll get frustrated and I'll be in persecutor. Now, usually we're aware enough to know we're not going to dump our feelings onto students, but we can get a little bit frustrated and that's normal. It's okay, but we want to acknowledge it and notice it. Because if we notice that, then we can understand, okay, if I'm getting triggered by this student, probably their peers are also, which is contributing to why this is so hard for them. So that reflection, we don't want to use it to beat ourselves up and say, oh my gosh, I'm doing the wrong thing. We just want to use it to go, this is interesting. If I feel this way about this student, what dynamic are we in? And then how does that play out in the rest of their life? Because it definitely does. If you feel a certain way around a student, guaranteed their peers also do. So you want to use that reflection piece and really stop and notice as much as you can. Who upsets me, or who do I feel really sorry for? Who do I feel like I need to fix things for? Just noticing that is really powerful. So some of the thoughts that you want to be thinking, and this is a really, really important thing to be able to do if you can at the end of each day, when you get through your day, just as you're going home or any point, you don't have to spend too much time on it, but start thinking about, what do I notice? What do I notice in my students? I wonder why. That question is really powerful. I wonder why that student keeps getting picked on. I wonder why, I feel that way all the time around them. And then, I see myself reacting to. So just giving yourself that grace to know that it's okay to have these reactions. But the more you notice them and the more you see, gosh, I went in to fix it again. I always want to make it better for that one student because I can see they're struggling. You can start to notice, so this is the pattern that they're in, and this is the pattern that I'm in with them. So these kinds of thoughts are really, really powerful. So the next step, when you notice and you see what's happening, the next step is that you want to connect to their feeling. So you want to understand, what is the feeling underneath that reaction? So feelings are a little bit like an iceberg. We see the tip of the iceberg. We see a student acting in a certain way, reacting in a certain way, but there's going to be so many layers underneath that. And so you want to think, what is that underneath feeling? So usually the underneath feeling is the most vulnerable feeling. So, the feeling of fear, or the feeling of loneliness, or those feelings that are a little bit tricky and a little bit soft and a little bit vulnerable. And so how can you relate to and validate that? So we want to, in some senses, sort of ignore the outside behavior. Now, that doesn't mean we don't set boundaries. It doesn't mean we don't address it. But in the moment when you're connecting to the feeling, you want to imagine that none of that stuff happened. And I'm just seeing this child with this feeling, and I'm just trying to connect to that feeling, because that is the fastest way to bring them out of their reaction. That's what we're trying to help them do. How do I cut through and bring them out of that reaction? And that's how we can guide them to make a different choice next time, is to help them go, let's see if we can have a conversation about what you're really feeling, so that you learn how to express that differently, so you don't have to be caught up in that cycle. That's our goal. So when we think about what they're feeling, so if you think about a child in victim, usually a child in victim is feeling, sad, overwhelmed, lonely, that hopelessness. Now, that is a feeling that we can all relate to. So what you want to be thinking about is, and you don't have to use a personal example with them, but you can think about a personal example. What do I feel like when someone's been mean to me and I don't know why? What does that feel like? So that connection of, "Wow, that feels really uncomfortable." Think about it in your current life. What if someone was just cruel to you for no reason at your workplace? What does that feel like? That feels really, really hard. So you're just trying to acknowledge the feeling and not talking about their behavior, just getting into that feeling. So victim is one that most of us can relate to. Rescuer. So usually with people that are in rescuer, there's a fear, there's anxiety, there's that feeling that comes up of, I need to fix this. And the thing to remember is that underneath our anxiety is also very similar feelings to someone that's in victim. So usually under the anxiety is sadness, loneliness, those kinds of feelings as well, because our anxiety is trying to get us away from those feelings. So we start to feel a little bit sad or a little bit lonely, and immediately our fix it mode comes in to go, how can I make this better? So a really good thing to understand is that there is that similarity, but it's just coming out more as fear in rescuer, whereas in victim, it's coming out more as almost a little bit more honestly as the raw underneath feeling of, I'm just really overwhelmed. Then there's bully, the kids that go into that persecutor mode. So of course we see anger. That's the first thing we see, and that's definitely there. But underneath that is usually the same feelings. So overwhelmed, sad, lonely. Now, the tricky thing with when, for all of us, when we're in bully or rescuer, and definitely for kids, is it's harder to tap into that underneath feeling. It's a little bit more buried. So if you ask a child who's, angry and acting out, if they're feeling sad underneath, it might be hard for them to articulate that or even recognize that, but they are feeling that. So we want to help understand and identify and relate to that underneath feeling. So if you think of the last time you snapped at someone or got frustrated, and maybe you're not someone that does that externally, but you just do that in your mind, getting frustrated or critical, or maybe you took it out on someone. Underneath that, what you were probably feeling is maybe disrespected, maybe not heard or not validated, maybe disconnected or lonely from the person that you're getting frustrated with, or something hard had happened. So that's what we're trying to understand and connect to, because the only way to promote behavior change is if we're dealing with the feeling that's leading to that behavior. Because just by coming at it logically and coming at it from the position of, you did, for example, if you think about the kid who's bullying, you bullied and it's not okay and you need to stop, that's never going to promote their behavior change. The boundary is great and we want a strong boundary, but a boundary and helping them and coaching them on, what can I do differently? Why did I do that? Because if we just have a boundary and we haven't coached them on a different way, and we haven't helped them feel like there is a different way that they could use, then they just feel shame because there's that sense of, I know the right thing. Kids know the right thing. I know I'm not doing it. I must be a bad kid. And then they just get into more of that cycle. So we really want to be sort of understanding those underneath feelings. And then the language that we want to use. You can say things like, I can see you're feeling sad, or I can see you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, or I can see you're feeling frustrated. A very typical psychology statement, I know, but it really is effective. I can see you're feeling overwhelmed right now. That's really hard. So you don't have to pry it out of them. You don't have to ask, tell me what you're feeling, because sometimes they'll tell you, sometimes they won't be ready to, but you can identify it. I get it, that must be really hard. So even for the student that has been cruel, I can see you're feeling maybe a little bit left out, and that must be hard. I get it. Or I can see you're feeling frustrated with the other student, and that I get it. It's hard. It's hard when someone is doing something that annoys us or frustrates us. I really get why you're upset. So we're not saying the behavior is okay, but we're saying, I get you. I get why you're doing that. I understand you. And when you do that, it's golden. When they see that and they understand that you really see them and you really get them, you can encourage them to do so many things. They'll listen to you. So again, the boundary is great. You still can say, hey, and we'll get to this later on, what you're doing isn't okay, but you also say this piece, I can see this is what you're feeling. So same thing happens for a rescuer. We want to help them orient to, I can see you're feeling anxious about this, and that's hard, or a victim. I can see this is really overwhelming. So we're just validating that. Then the third piece is encourage independent choices. So we always start with noticing, then we always connect to the feeling first and foremost before you try anything around their behavior, because they have to calm down first. And so connecting to their feeling means their fight or flight system can relax, and they're actually present and able to have a conversation about what happened and what they can do differently. So in that, we want to remind them of their power. This is the most important thing, because in all three of those positions, the underlying theme is a sense of powerlessness. I'm caught in this. So a bully is trying to regain their power by force. A victim is feeling overwhelmed and thinking, I just don't have power and there's nothing I can do. And then a rescuer is trying to regain their power by fixing and controlling things. So we remind them they don't need to do these things to be in power, and then we help them shift those patterns. That's the simple way of thinking about it. So when we look at this triangle again, how do we move out of it? So for the victim, we want them to get into a creator mindset. I am the creator of my own reality to a certain extent. Of course, there are things that are out of our control always, but if we remember our power, everything shifts. We're not in that helpless mind state anymore. For a rescuer, we want to move to coach. So I can help people, I can guide people, I can influence the world to a certain extent, but I'm not on the field with the other people. I can't fix it for them. So this is good for us to remember if we go into rescuer with kids. I need to step back so that they can learn how to do it themselves, because if we always rescue someone that's in victim, they never learn that they're a creator. They never learn their own power. So it's a really important piece, that's stepping back. And then for kids that are in persecutor, or if we find ourselves in persecutor, what we want to do is help them learn how to be a challenger rather than a persecutor. So to set a boundary, because when we go into anger and frustration, what we're really saying is there's a boundary that's missing here, and I'm trying to set it by force. So if we can learn to set that boundary in a healthy way, like, I don't like what you're doing, verbalizing that shifts us out of that. So we don't go into that frustration. So what does that look like? So when we think about a victim, a child that is in that state of victimhood, they become self-confident through taking action. So that can be anything, literally anything, the smallest thing. So you can, help and guide them and coach them. But for example, if someone's being cruel to them, if they walk away, a simple act like that, I'm going to walk away. All of a sudden, there's something I can do in that moment. And I start to realize I have some power. I can't control what they do, but if I walk away, I don't have to listen to that anymore. So just a simple piece like that, or think a different thought, or whatever it is, any little thing that they can do, take a deep breath, tell the teacher, talk about it, draw about your feeling. It doesn't matter what they're doing, but if they take some action to help themselves, they're no longer in that victim mind state. So that's the thing we want to remember. Encourage them. What's something you can do? The bully, like I was saying, when they're able to set a healthy boundary, they can become more self-reflective about their actions. So a really effective way of dealing with kids that are bullying, that are being cruel or unkind, is to listen to them. Because what they're saying with that cruelty is, I don't feel like anyone is going to listen to me or pay attention to me unless I'm really forceful. So if you've already done the validation, you've already done that, I see that you're feeling frustrated and overwhelmed. And if you listen to them, what is it that you'd like in this situation? What do you hope the outcome would be? And if you actually give them a platform to tell you, to say, I really just wanted them to stop doing that. Okay, you listening to them, you're helping them learn and understand that just by speaking and communicating, someone can hear them. So we have to retrain that. So they've learned for somewhere in their background, in their environment, that the way to get their needs met is to be unkind. We have the opportunity through our interaction with them to show them a different way. So if we listen to their boundary and we respect their boundary, they'll be a lot more likely to not use that in the future, not use that aggression. And this takes time. All of this takes time, but we want to slowly build up that trust in them that they will be listened to. And then with rescuer, so it's that self-awareness comes from stepping back. So you can encourage, when something's stressful and hard like that, what would happen if you take a deep breath and just remember that you're okay before you try to jump in? So what are the tools you can use in yourself to just calm yourself down a bit so you're not quite so, right into your pattern or your addictive pattern, or you're trying to fix it? How can you self-soothe a little bit? So any internal strategies of just, how do I take a step back? And sometimes that's actually also leaving the situation. How do I just move away from that and learn that things are okay when I don't insert myself? So some of the language here, you can set the boundary. What you're doing is not okay. If they're doing something that isn't okay, very good to do that in this stage after you validated the feeling. But then the question is, what can you do to help yourself? This is the powerful question. So we validated, we heard them, and then we flip it back and we say, what do you think will help here? And a really effective way with kids and teens is, to help them understand, what are all the options? So I used to do this a lot when I worked with kids who were bullied and they're really stuck in that victim mentality and you feel helpless. You actually make a whole list and you let them be creative with this. So what are all the things we could do here? And let them name things like, well, I could yell at them. I could fight back. I could hurt them the way they hurt me. I could, you let them say it. Yeah, it's a possibility. We could do that. And what else could we do? I could tell them to stop. I could walk away. I could go play with other friends. And then you look at all the options and then you go to, what do you think is the thing that'll help the most? So the whole way, like, you can really have this, if you have time, of course, sometimes you don't have that full amount of time, but if you have time to really explore with them, it gives them the chance to still have agency. What can I do? What do I think is the right thing? So even if you're suggesting things, and if you don't have that much time, which of course is usually the case when you're teaching, you can just simply ask that question. What can you do to help yourself? Why don't you try one thing? And you can suggest it. Why don't you try, have you tried walking away? Why don't you try that and come report back to me next time and see how that feels? So you can do it in really little mini ways, but you're always giving them the power. That's your whole aim. So the other thing to really just keep in mind is that students learn through observation. They're watching us all the time. So every little change that we make, and every time, again, you don't have to divulge everything in any way to your students, but saying little things about, when I get upset, sometimes I get I rush through things and I get a little bit stressed, and I'm learning to, take a breath and step back. Or, if you can relate to them in any way, when someone's mean to me, I really get down on myself. It's super hard. I get it. So one thing I do is, just remind myself of the people that care about me, or I call a friend and I chat to them. So you can use these little examples and just show them that you get it. Again, you don't have to tell them anything about your personal life. You just tell them about your feeling. I know that feeling. That's a really hard feeling. Here's what I do. So any way that you can kind of give them these examples. And again, this is where it's really helpful to have other peer examples too, giving them these examples of, what do you see that student doing? What do you think? What can we learn from them? That they feel that too, all of that piece. So in any way we can show them, that's really, really helpful. Okay, so to wrap it up, these are the steps that we want to do. In the moment, remember, it's not personal. So take a breath, take care of your own feelings, see the pattern. So just see if you can zoom out and remember that this is stressful. Being around peer challenges in students is a very stressful experience. And so it's okay and it's normal for you to have your own reaction to it. So just honor that and take a breath, notice if you need to step back for a minute before you do anything, do that. That's a really good idea, a good thing to do, to just zoom out. What's happening here? Then connect to the feeling. So see if you can name their feeling. And this is what you want the first words to be. First words out of your mouth is, oh, I can really see that you're feeling upset by this, or I can see this is really hard for you. And I get that. That's the first thing you want to say. And then once you've validated that, then you can move into the next part, which is, what's something that can help you in this situation? What do you think would be a really good idea here? And sometimes they need to stay at the feeling for a little bit longer, and that's okay. Sometimes if they're really overwhelmed or they're really angry, we just need to let them calm down and see, I can see that you're feeling really upset. What can we do to calm down? And then let's talk about it. Or why don't you go outside for a little bit and come back and then we'll discuss it. So you can give them some space there if you need to, or you can jump right into it. And then it's that simple next question. What can you do to help yourself in this situation? So just those 3 simple steps, always making sure you're looking at the feeling first and then moving into, how can I give them power here? And again, you can do this really quickly. So if you're in the middle of a class and there's students everywhere and you just are in that moment and you have a second for this, it can happen that quickly. Just, I can see you're feeling really, really, this is really hard for you. I get it. I saw what happened. That's really hard. What do you think would be a good idea to do? Why don't you try that and tell me how it goes? So it can be as quick as that, just a simple conversation. And it's also okay that that's a public conversation. It doesn't have to be a private conversation. When you're just saying, I get it, I know that feeling, what do you think you can do? That's okay for other students to hear that, because that's a really helpful and healthy way to communicate. And so it's really good to actually role model that. So you can do that just in your class. Okay, amazing. That is all I have. So I'm really happy to answer any questions anyone has. If anyone wants to ask questions or comment, go ahead.